Hey guys, in this video I'm talking about Hans Asperger and some of the stuff that you've probably never known about him. Here's some facts coming up. Hey guys, welcome back to the TheAspieWorld. My name is Dan. I have autism, ADHD, OCD and dyslexia. So if you're new around here and you stumbled across this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button by clicking the notification bell. And if you're watching over on Facebook, be sure to give this page a like and a follow so you don't miss out on another video. Okay guys, welcome back. How's it going? Well, it's been a long time since I've even mentioned Hans Asperger, but I figured I would do this video because in this video I'm going to talk about stuff that you've probably never ever heard about Hans Asperger and some really interesting facts about him. So yeah, let's get into it. So if you don't know who Hans Asperger is, Hans Asperger is the guy who was, who the condition Aspergers Syndrome was named after, which is on my diagnostic paper. I was diagnosed with Aspergers Syndrome, and we'll get into a little bit more detail about, Aspergers Syndrome versus autism versus all that other stuff. But for now, you just need to know that he was a researcher on autism, and obviously the condition Aspergers Syndrome was named after him. Now there's been a load of content made about Hans Asperger, some shady content, some interesting insight and some recent revelations with including the Nazis and all kinds of stuff like that. So without further ado, we're going to get into this video and I'm going to speak to you about all those things, but give you the fact of some really cool, interesting fact. Because I think that facts are really interesting, and especially if it's for and about a diagnosis kind of that I have and stuff like that, I think it's really interesting. So these are 5 of the ones that I thought was really interesting. Now, if you guys want to hit me up on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok, you can do using my name at TheAspieWorld. You can find me on there and I will have a link on the screen here for you to check it out, and there will be a physical link in the description below. Also guys, if you're enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment and let me know what you know about Hans Asperger. If I've missed anything out that you think is super relevant or interesting, put it in a comment down below. I'd read and respond to every single one. That'd be super awesome. Okay, so number 1 is that Hans Asperger opened a school for children with his sister, Viktorine Zak. That was her name. The school was actually bombed and destroyed during the Second World War because they lived in, near Germany. They lived in Austria and Germany. Viktorine was actually killed, and then all of Hans Asperger's early works from all the stuff he was studying was actually lost because the whole thing was just bombed. So he actually kept all of his early study files of studying autism within the school, but then the school obviously was bombed because he was actually studying behavior in children, especially young boys of specific personality types, which then obviously later became autism and Asperger's Syndrome. Okay, so fact number 2. I find this one really interesting, right? A guy called George Frankl was actually Asperger's chief diagnostician. It's a weird name, and I've probably not said it right, until he moved from Austria to America because he was hired by a guy called Leo Kanner. Now and this was in 1937. Now Leo Kanner was actually Hans Asperger's kind of competition, because Leo Kanner was studying the same thing about young children on the spectrum and trying to figure out what it was and what to call it and stuff, which he called Early Infantile Autism. Actually, sometimes it was called Kenner Syndrome, but he called it Early Infantile Autism, and then obviously dropped the Early Infantile because it was a broad spectrum across every age, so they just called it autism. So it's really interesting. So Hans Asperger's kind of cheap diagnostic guy then moved to America and was hired by his competition, which, yeah, that's really weird. But in 1937, that's an interesting time to travel the Atlantic. So this is fact number 3. Hans Asperger actually died before his identification for the pattern of behavior became widely diagnosed and recognized. So people were starting to be diagnosed with Asperger's Syndrome, but they actually they weren't able to do that, until a long time after he died, because basically it was mainly down to the fact that all of his research was in German, and so they had to kind of it was exclusively in German, so they had to translate it and try and figure it out. And the weird thing about language is that when you write something that's kind of doctoral, or you're writing a thesis and it's in your native tongue, it's hard to then translate that exactly. It takes a while because you need somebody who's can speak professionally in that language and can translate it, especially medical terms and things that he was developing. So that's fascinating, actually, that the fact that he died way before seeing Hans Asperger's Syndrome be rolled out as a recognized condition, which is, I find that fascinating. I mean, that's super interesting. Give this video a thumbs up if you find that fascinating, and join me in the thumbs up gang. Okay, and number 4, Asperger's cooperated with the Nazi regime, including sending children to the Asperger clinic, which was participating in the euthanasia program. And the euthanasia, if you don't know, is kind of when they just put people to sleep, they kill people. It's actually kind of genocidal murder, but Hans Asperger actually cooperated with the Nazi regime there. Now, this kind of sparked off a lot of debate recently if Hans Asperger was a good guy or a bad guy. I guess anybody cooperating with Nazis was pretty much a bad person, but at the end of the day, if it's like, you know, help them out or be killed, then I guess maybe he wasn't even aware what he was doing. I don't know the ins and outs on that. I know I've read some stuff that says he was in the know about it, but you don't know unless you interview the guy, and of course he's dead now, and he died in 1980. So in terms of that, I don't know how I feel about it. I think that anybody like siding with the Nazis is just horrible, and it is a horrible thing to do, and like euthanasia of children, I mean, goodness me, it's horrendous. But you know, it's a horrible past, but the research he did do and did publish was very, very much relevant and is still being used today in some relevant studies. So a bit of an odd one, but I think the Nazi thing was definitely a shell shock, because this came out recently in the news that he had something to do with the Nazis. I actually did another video specifically on him and the Nazis, and I'll try and leave that in a card above here and a link in the description and on the end slate so you don't miss that video. But it's very, very interesting. But also very, very scary, and yeah, gives me a bit of the chills, to be honest with you. But it did actually spark a big debate where people said, you know, should we just not call ourselves Asperger's Syndrome, you know, or should we change it, you know, because if you had a diagnosis and, you know, you were called, you know, it was Asperger's Syndrome on your diagnosis, should you seek a new one just to update that terminology? And it was kind of like a 50-50. Some people said, well, look, it's nothing to do, you know, it's a completely on its own now, you know, it was nothing to do with him in general, like it was his research, but it's not actually him who diagnosed those people, and you know, it wasn't nothing directly to do with Hans Asperger. And then other people said, well, no, it's still his name and his legacy. So it's this big debate. Anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts on it. Pop in a comment down below. You know it's good for you. Okay, so number 5, the term Asperger's Syndrome, which was named after Hans Asperger, was added into the diagnostic criteria for the DSM in 1994. And the DSM is an American psychological diagnostic kind of criteria book where it kind of classifies people in certain kind of mental health and neurological conditions, and that's how they determine how to diagnose somebody. But the interesting thing was that Asperger's Syndrome was removed as a standalone condition or a standalone diagnosis, and it was morphed into Autism Spectrum Disorder, or just ASD, in 2013 in the DSM-5 edition, because they updated the actual DSM in 2013 to the DSM-5, and they actually took the name Asperger's Syndrome and dissolved that, and then they actually put it all into like the criteria for it into the Autism Spectrum Disorder part. So now somebody with Asperger's Syndrome is typically just ASD, you know, they've just got Autism Spectrum Disorder. And the reason they did this was because people who were being diagnosed with autism were getting access to help and support for people with autism, but people diagnosed with Asperger's Syndrome had a harder time actually accessing that care and support and help network, because their diagnostic didn't really say autism, it said Asperger's Syndrome, when Asperger's Syndrome is autism, if you know what I mean. So in order to help overcome that, they kind of dissolved the naming of Asperger's Syndrome and then just put it into Autism Spectrum Disorder, which it was already under the umbrella anyway, but officially, diagnostically, it needed to do that in order to help people access help and support where needed. And I think that was a really good move. And having Autism Spectrum Disorder is so much easier than trying to explain that Asperger's Syndrome is autism and vice versa when people don't know and they ask questions on it, because it's quite a difficult thing to know. And there's, you know, a lot of people asking the difference between autism and Asperger's Syndrome, and it's a bit kind of like, ah. Anyway guys, those were my interesting facts. I'd love to know your opinion on it, and if you think this video is interesting, please share it by clicking that share button and share it on Facebook and Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video guys. Peace.